Hello everyone, good evening. While we are waiting for others to dial in, let's get connected to the instances, guys. I'll open up OIC instance first. We'll be starting off with a file transfer service today. So we're done with the Hello World services and we're going to get started with the file transfer service. Now, what's the use case, guys? First of all, there would be plenty of scenarios. I think I briefly discussed this use case in our day one session as well. Not day one, day two session. Like sometimes you get requirements from a client wherein all you need to do is pick up files from one location and transfer it to another location. Okay, let me take a use case and explain how it works. So let's say you're doing an implementation project for a manufacturing client. Okay, and your client has a internal warehouse management system. Okay, here they have items and a whole lot of information is available here. Now, periodically or yes, frequently the items get updated in the system. And with those item updates, WMS system would be generating files. It would be generating CSV files. And in that CSV file, you have the updated item information. You have the updated item information. And WMS system is going to write those CSV files to server 1. To on-prem SFTP server, let's call it server 1. And this is a source server. So let's call it as a source SFTP server. Okay, so internal warehouse management system. Periodically, items get updated in it. And as and when the items are updated, in it, or periodically files would be generated, maybe every 1 hour or every day once. The files get generated and the files would be placed in on-prem SFTP server. Okay, we can call this as server 1 or a source SFTP server, and this is within the client network. Okay. Now, these item updates, which are there in those CSV files, should be made available to a third-party system. Let's say your client uses a shipping application, a third-party shipping application, or it could be OTM application. So as that shipping application or a third-party system that your client uses to ship the sales orders maybe needs to have access to this updated item information. Yes or no, guys? They need to have the updated details, right? Now, can we go to the client as an integration specialist? Can we go to the client and ask them to expose this on-prem SFTP server to the third parties, guys? Would clients be okay with it? Not really, right? Because clients would say they would see, for the obvious security reasons, there might be a lot of other information that might be lying in the server, guys. So no client would be happy to expose on-prem SFTP servers to the third parties. Okay, so our first option is ruled out. Source is writing files here, and a third-party system wants to access them. So we went to the client and asked them, can we give access of this server to third party? And what's the answer? The answer is no. Now, what's the second thing that we're going to do, or what's the only option left, guys? Since we cannot give access of this SFTP server to the third-party system, what we can do, guys? We can go ahead. What we can do is, since we cannot give access of SFTP server 1 to the third party, we go to the application via the third-party system and ask them, boss, is there any other SFTP server that you have got access to? Okay, so that what I can do, since you are able to access this SFTP server, what I would do was I would transfer the files from this location to this location. So when I asked third-party system this question, they said that, yes, Prasad, we have access to SFTP server 2. Let's call it as target. And just to make it obvious that this is a different SFTP server and this is a different one, I just put in random SFTP host names there. Okay. So application B has access to server 2, but source is writing files to server 1 SFTP servers. Now, what is it that we have to do in such case? We need to build a integration. We need to build a scheduled integration to transfer the files from server 1 to server 2. Okay, now whenever we get such requirements earlier, guys, we used to use a product called MFT. We used to have a product called MFT from Oracle, guys. It stands for Managed File Transfer. It's a pretty easy to use product, guys. We just have to log into the application. We need to create a source connection, a target connection, and then we have to just set up a transfer, and it works seamlessly. But Oracle has stopped offering new licenses for this product, guys. So even if you're willing to pay or your client is willing to pay, Oracle is not going to give you a new license of this. It's probably because whatever you could do in MFT, right, you can build that exact same logic into a scheduled orchestration in OIC. Okay. So what is it that we are supposed to do? We need to build a file transfer service, which would transfer files from SFTP server 1 to SFTP server 2 on a periodic basis. Okay, so depending on the frequency with which WMS system is going to generate the files, we're going to schedule the integration that way. So if WMS system generates file every 1 hour, we schedule the service also 1 hour. It goes there, lists down the files. It sees, first of all, if there are any files or not. If there are files, we're going to loop through them and we are going to transfer them to server 2. Now, before I come to the design part, before I come to the design of the integration, let me talk about how to connect to the SFTP servers first. Okay, so you need to understand how to connect to an FTP or SFTP server from your laptop. That's one thing that you need to know, because after you build the service, you need to test it, and after to test it, you need to place the files manually. And we also need to see if the files are transferred to the target or not. So we need to connect to the FTP server from laptop. That's one step from your machine. And the second step is we need to understand how to connect to SFTP server from OIC instance. And if you go to your onboarding email, guys, if you go to your onboarding email, you would have these SFTP logins shared. In the onboarding email, you have these SFTP logins shared. So this is your SFTP host name, port, username, and a password. What does SFTP stands for, guys? Secure Shell File Transfer Protocol. So it's basically a server where you can store the files. And our files could be of two types, guys. File servers could be of two types, FTP or SFTP. FTP uses port 21. SFTP uses port 22. And SFTP is more secure than FTP. Okay, so and the server that we give you access to, so this server that we have given you access to, guys, it is an SFTP server, not FTP. Okay, now how do we connect to this, guys? To connect to a SFTP or FTP servers, to connect to FTP or SFTP servers, we need to have an FTP client. Okay, so what are the popular FTP clients available in the market today, guys? We have WinSCP, we have FileZilla. So these are the leading SFTP clients, meaning these are basically the tools that you can use to connect to FTP servers. Now, please don't use WinSCP, guys. Even if you have it, that's fine. So it's recommended to use FileZilla, because for some reason, if we use WinSCP and if we try to connect to the server, sometimes we are getting a error saying invalid message number. So, okay, it's a known bug. We're not really sure what the issue was, but please don't use WinSCP to connect to the SFTP server. Use FileZilla. What if you don't have it installed on your machine, guys? Just spend 2 minutes of your time, Google it, go to download FTP client, the FileZilla client. Remember, guys, don't download server. We don't need server. Server is like installing an FTP server on your machine. Instead, we need a client. So you go to client, click on client, and you download it. So there would be an executable file. There would be an executable file that gets downloaded. And once you download that executable file and install it, you would be able to see a shortcut like this. You would be able to see a shortcut like this appearing on your desktop. Okay. So you can go ahead and open the software or open the tool after you install it. Now, after you open it, you get a screen like this one. Now we have an option to do a quick connect here. we have an option to enter the host username, password, and do a quick connect. Don't use this, guys. Don't use quick connect, and don't use WinSCP, no WinSCP, and no quick connect within FileZilla. Instead, you're going to a site manager. You're going to site manager, and here you can go ahead and add a new site. And how do you add a new site, guys? So you create a new site, and the first thing that you need to do is select a server type. So these are our SFTP logins. So this server or a host that we have given you access to, guys, is it an FTP or SFTP server? SFTP server. SSH file transfer protocol is what we need to select. Secure shell file transfer protocol. And this is a port host. And this is a port that you need to use. And you can go ahead and use this username, enter this username, password, and you can select a background color if you want. And you can go ahead and get connected to it. You can go ahead and get connected to it. And you can also save the site as well. You can also save the site as well so that you don't have to do it every time. Okay, so you can go ahead and click OK, or you say connect. It would get connected to the SFTP server. And within the SFTP server, what is it that you're going to see? You would be able to see a root folder. So this is going to be our root folder because we logged in as UG-OIC.user1, right? So this is our root folder. And within the root folder, you have a UG folder. Within the root folder, you have UG folder. Get into it. Remember, guys, don't create any folders in the root directory. Go to UG folder, and here you create your own directory and create it with your own initials, guys. So whatever are your initials, first name and last name. So if Murli Krishna is doing this, he can probably use MK as a directory path. He can use MK. Okay, use all small letters. First name, first letter, last name, first letter. And I'm going to use UG63. Okay, because this is an identifier for your badge. And I'm going to create it, and I would get into it. And within this directory path, I'm going to create the required folder structure. Okay, I'm going to create, say, I would say file transfer service. This is a folder structure for file transfer service. And I'm going to create the required folders here. I'm going to create the required folders like input, output, and archive. Now in the input folder, so let's assume that we go to this WMS system. Assume that this is a SFTP server 1. Assume that this is your on-prem SFTP server. And yes, periodically the WMS system is going to write the item CSV files into this specific location, into the input location. Okay. So since we don't have WMS system here to place the files, we'll help ourselves. We'll place few item CSV files in there. Now, if you go in here, go to file transfer service folder. UG63. I'm going to delete this. I'm going to delete this as well. So I've got 3 CSV files in here. And if you open the CSV files, what's the content, guys, that we have in it? You have a header row wherein you have item columns, like item ID, organization code number, etc. And you also have the data rows as well. You also have the data rows as well. So whatever are the items which are updated in a WMS system, with those details, it's going to generate a CSV files like this, and it's going to place those CSV files in the on-premise FTP server. So let's go in and place those files, guys. I'm going to place these 3 files. Okay, now what is the requirement? The requirement is that yes, a WMS system is going to write the item CSV files like this in the source in the SFTP location. We need to pick them up and we need to transfer them to the target SFTP server. That's a requirement. Okay. Now we have seen how to connect to an SFTP server from a SFTP client or a tool like FileZilla. But remember, guys, when I build a file transfer service or a scheduled orchestration in OIC, for me to be able to interact with this SFTP servers, I should establish connectivity from OIC instance with this SFTP host, right? Yes or no, guys? Before we create the integration, what is it that we need to do? We need to establish connectivity with SFTP server 1 and SFTP server 2 as well. I basically have to interact with two SFTP servers here. So I need to create two FTP connections. So let's go to the projects first. UG63. And here I'm going to create a connection first. And remember, guys, we have an FTP adapter in OIC, and this adapter would help you to connect to both FTP and SFTP servers, guys. Remember, we don't have another adapter called SFTP. We only have one adapter called FTP, and this would help you to talk to both FTP as well as SFTP servers. Okay, get into that. So use FTP adapter, and I'm going to see UG63 FTP connection. UG63 FTP connection. Okay, and this is going to be a source FTP connection. And I'm going to create it. Remember, the role for FTP connection is going to be only invoke. We cannot use FTP connection as a trigger, guys. So whenever I do this file transfer service, I get this question in very common, guys. So there would be at least a couple of students who ask me, Prasad, we're going to build this integration and we would schedule it, right? To run once every hour or once every 4 hours. And the integration is going to go to SFTP server 1 and see if there are any files. But Prasad, cannot we start a service when the file is placed here? Can't we keep polling on the FTP server and start the service whenever a file is placed? Is it possible, yes or no, guys? In FTP adapter, what is the only role that is available? We don't have a choice here, if you see. I can only use FTP connection as an invoke, guys. I cannot use it to trigger an integration. Or in other words, we cannot, we don't have a polling option in FTP adapter. Okay, so I'm going to create it. Now in the FTP connection, what are the details that we need to enter, guys? Okay, so we need to enter the, since it is FTP adapter, I need to enter FTP host and FTP port, and I would enter FTP username, and I would enter the password. So you enter SFTP host, SFTP port, and you enter the username and the password. And you test it. Would it go through, guys? There's one important point I want to explain. So if you look at the optional properties here, there would be one flag which asks you, Prasad, whether this is an FTP server or an SFTP server. Remember, that is an optional property, so I didn't enter a value. But you notice what happens now? It shouldn't take this long ideally, but that's okay. What's the error that we have got, guys? It says unable to access host, that's fine. And it again says the same stuff, unable to connect, that's fine. Please verify host and port. And this last line is important. If you're trying to connect to SFTP server, remember, guys, this is an SFTP server, right? Because even if you see here, so we selected SFTP and it went through successfully here. So since this is an SFTP server, please choose yes for SFTP connection property. So within the connection properties, if you expand additional properties or optional properties, you see SFTP connection, and I need to select it as yes here, and I'm going to test the connection. So sometimes you might see that some of the properties are marked as optional, but until you select a value, you won't be able to test the connection, guys. Okay. and you go ahead and save this. So this is a connection that we're going to use to interact. This is a connection we're going to use to interact with the source SFTP server, guys. So to interact with the source SFTP server, we're going to make use of this connection. But please note that we need to also talk to SFTP server too, right? We need to write the file to SFTP server too. So we need another connection, which is to talk to a target SFTP server. So let's go ahead and create a new connection, guys. Use FTP adapter. And you say UG63 FTP connection. And I'm going to call it as target. Now, one important point, guys. This SFTP server that we have given you access to, remember, guys, it's not a free stuff. Okay, so it's a paid server. So we pay to the vendor for using this SFTP server. Okay, so since it is a paid SFTP server that we have, we only have one SFTP server, guys. We don't have two. So since we've got only one SFTP server, I'm going to enter the same SFTP hostname and the port here in the target FTP connection as well. But in real time, when you build this sort of integrations, the only thing that would change is everything would remain as is. The way you build the integration or the way you use the connection, the only thing that would change is in the target FTP connection, instead of the same hostname, you would be writing file to a different hostname. Okay, so don't get confused, guys. Why are we using the same hostname here? Because it's a paid service and we've got only one. That's why we're using it. In real time, you would be using a different SFTP host. And I'm going to test the connection. So we have both the connections set up now, source and target SFTP connections. So I can make use of these two connections to build a file transfer service now. I can make use of two connections. So you have source FTP connection, you have target FTP connection. So we can make use of these two connections to build a file transfer service. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with it. So create a new integration. And when you create a new integration, remember, I want to build this integration and schedule it to run every hour. If WMS system says I'm going to write the files every 1 hour, so we would schedule it accordingly. If they say I'm going to write the files every 4 hours, so you schedule it to run every 4 hours. So we're going to build this as a scheduled orchestration. And I'm going to call it as file transfer service. Remember, guys, in this integration, we are only going to transfer the files, meaning we just pick up file from one location and drop it in another location. We are not going to get into stuff like reading a file content or loading the file into ERP cloud or transforming the file content. So all that stuff with regards to file processing will be covering it as part of the FPDA automation. So when we do file-based data import automation service, we will talk about everything that you need to know about file processing. So the usual questions that come to your mind, like, Prasad, what is the biggest file size we can handle? Can we convert the file from one format to another format? Can we use a database layer when we process the file? So many questions or any stuff related to file processing will be covering it here. I'm not going to answer any questions related to them or related to file processing in today's session because all we are trying to do was transfer the files. So we'll restrict it to this particular bit. And you get plenty of scenarios like this in real time, guys. So don't think that this is just some cooked up story. In real time, there would be many scenarios wherein source systems would be writing files to one location, whereas the target expects the files to be at a different location. And that's where you build these sort of services that we're going to do now. Okay. Now let's hit the create button here. Now, the moment you create it, yes, we need to get started with a build. And since I selected scheduled orchestration, the triggering point for the integration has been defaulted as a schedule. Triggering point is a schedule. Now, what's the logic that we're going to plug in here, guys? Let's talk about that. So the first thing that I want to do is, I want to first go into SFTP server 1. I want to go to this, but I want to connect to the source SFTP server. I want to go to this particular folder first. I want to go to this particular folder. And I want to list down the files that we have in this folder first. I want to list the files that we have in this specific folder. Okay. Now, if we go in here, you see, we would be doing a list files operation. We would be doing a list files operation. And so we use FTP source FTP connection, the first connection that we created, and we do a list files operation. So we basically list down the files. And when we list down the files again, guys, we don't need to mention or hard code a specific file name. We can mention a pattern as well. So I can tell OIC to go into this location and search for item CSV files. Now today we have 3 files, guys. Tomorrow it could be 0. Day after tomorrow it could be 10. So since there's no guarantee that the files could be there or could not be there, and the number of files could vary from 0 to n. So the first thing in the integration we need to do is list down the files in source server to see if there is anything that needs to be transferred in first place. And when you list down the files, you get back a response. You get back a response. And in that response, you have a collection of files. And how many files could be there in that collection, guys? It can be 0 to n. 0 to n, right? And we need to loop through that collection of files. We need to loop through that collection of files. And what sort of loop do we use for it, guys? We use a for each loop. There are 2 types of loops available in OIC, guys. For each loop and while loop. In this integration, we use for each loop. Next integration, we understand how the while loop works. So we use a for each loop, and in the for each loop, what is it? What is the logic that we're going to do? First of all, how many times the loop will be iterated, guys? The loop will be iterated depending on the number of files that we have. Or to put it simple, for every file that we have in this server 1, the steps that you're going to put in the loop would be executed. Okay, so we're basically looping through the collection of files. And what are the steps that we need to perform, guys? 3 simple steps. Okay, so I'm going to read the file from server 1. So for example, in this case, we had 3 files, right? So let's say items1.csv is picked up first. I want to read that items1.csv from source SFTP server. And we use SFTP server 1 connection, source SFTP server connection. We use source FTP connection 3 times, guys, in the integration and target only once. We use source connection to list the files, and we use source connection to read a specific file that is being processed in that iteration. And when you read a file, what would happen, guys? The entire content of the file would come back in the response here. Now with that content, I want to write the file to target SFTP server. Okay, so we would read the file from here and we use the target FTP connection and we would write the file there. And when we write the file to a target FTP server, there is one thing that for now, I'll come to the encryption part in a moment. So yes, we would read the file from source, and with that content, we are going to use target FTP server and we would write the file. And when we write the file to the target, we are going to use the content that we have read from source. So this content in the response will be passed as input to this. So finally, we have written the file to server 2. So after you pick up a file from server 1 and deliver it to server 2, should we move this file to a different folder, guys? Should we archive it? We definitely have to archive it, right? Because this is going to be a scheduled orchestration. So say, for example, if you schedule the service to run every 1 hour, at 7 o'clock, let's say the integration runs, it could see 3 files. It's going to loop through them and all 3 files will be returned to the target. And if you leave files behind, if you leave the files in the same folder, what would happen, guys? 7.5 integration is done, and at 8 o'clock the integration runs again. What is it going to do, guys? The file transfer service run at 8 o'clock.
Again, it will try to do that.
Again, it will try to pick up the files. It's going to deliver it to the destination again. So it keeps it might result in data duplication, right? So after a file is picked up from source and delivered to the target successfully, we should archive the file. We need to move the file from source, from the input folder. We need to move the file from input folder to the archive folder, to the archive folder, to the archive folder. Okay, so that's going to be the last step. So we would use a source FTP connection again. And this time what we would do, we would move the file from input to archive location. We would move the file from input to archive location. We will pick up a file, list down the files, pick them up from input, and we are going to write the file to the output location. Since this is a paid SFTP server, guys, and since we've got only one SFTP server, I've created the output folder as well, the folder where we need to write the files. Yes, we need to write the files to output location, and this output folder is lying in the same SFTP server that we have the input folder. Guys, so this might be slightly confusing for you. You might say, Prasad, why can't we ask the WMS system to write the files to output directly instead of input? Don't get that out, guys, because in real time, this output folder will not be sitting in this location, guys, in this SFTP server. It won't be sitting here. It would be sitting in a different SFTP server altogether, which is not accessible to the WMS system. Okay. So since we don't have a second SFTP server, we're just using this output, or we created this folder in the same SFTP server. And after the file is picked up from input and delivered to the target or delivered to the output, we need to move the file from input to archive so that when the integration runs again, we don't see any files in there. We don't see any files in there. Okay. Now, what is it that we need to do, guys? Yes, this is a logic that we need to plug in. List down the files, first of all, loop through them. Read the file from source, write it to the target, and archive it. Plain and simple steps. And one important point, guys, here, when we pick up a file from source, or after we read the file from source SFTP server, we would be writing it to target. And when we write the file to target SFTP server, there are two things that we can do, guys. We can just place these item CSV files. We can just place these item CSV files as is in the output as well. We can just place these item CSV files as is in the output. But what's the problem with placing the normal CSV files or text files as an unencrypted file space? Remember, this output folder is going to sit in a third-party SFTP server. It's going to be third-party SFTP server. So what if somebody is able to crack the password and get into server 2, guys? What if somebody gets in there? What if somebody gets in there, guys? Gains.
They can alter content.
Yeah, they can first of all see the content, and that itself is a big risk for us. So if the file contains sensitive information, if the files contain sensitive information, we cannot normally place the CSV files as is. Because all they have to do is just, they would look at the file and they can download it. And after they download it, they can just open it with the text editor and they can see the content. They can basically walk away with your data, and your content is not secure, in other words. So what we normally do is, and I'm going to repeat one more time, guys, we would not do this for every file transfer. We would not do this for every file transfer. But if the files contain sensitive information, so we're dealing with files here, right? Only if the files contain sensitive information, what we do is, before we place the file in target FTP server, we're not going to plain the files as a plain CSV files or text files. Instead, we're going to encrypt them, and we place the encrypted file in a target SFTP server. So that what would happen, guys? So I'm not going to place items1.csv in here. Instead, I'm going to place encrypted file here, items1.csv.pgp. So that what would happen, guys, even if somebody is able to get into this folder, they see an encrypted file, which means even if they get hold of a file, they can open it, but they won't be able to understand the content of it because it's an encrypted file content. So which means I can sleep peacefully. I don't have to really care whether somebody is able to crack the password of this or not, or whether somebody is able to get in or not. Because I have encrypted the file content and I placed the encrypted files here. So the only person who can see that file content would be the third party system, because we are going to share the decryption key with them. Okay, do we do it for all the files, guys? No. Only if the files contain sensitive information like a payment files or employee files with SSNs, etc., then we do that. Now, I'm sure at least few of you might be hearing PGP encryption for the first time, right? So let me get into the PPT, guys. So FTP adapter that we have in OIC would help you to talk to FTP and SFTP servers. And what can you do, guys? After you create an FTP connection, or you can use that FTP connection in OIC integrations to pull the files. And you can also use the same connection to upload the files as well. Okay, so we'll see this. We'll see this when we build the integration. And so this is fine. OIC can pull the files from FTP to process them, and it can also upload the files. So we can do the read operation as well as write operation. Okay, and what else do we need to do, guys? We also have an FTP adapter. And what else can FTP adapter help you with, guys? So FTP adapter supports PGP encryption out of the box. What does PGP stands for, guys? It stands for pretty good privacy. And it is one of the leading encryption mechanism that's available in the market today, guys. So it is, please note that OIC or Oracle has got nothing to do with this. It is not their proprietary technology. So it's just a leading encryption mechanism that's available in the market today. Not just OIC, many other applications or softwares use PGP encryption. Now, since some of you, at least some of you are hearing it for the first time, let me show you with a quick hands on how it works. Is there anyone, guys, who is hearing PGP for the first time here? Anyone in the group?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So PGP stands for pretty good privacy. And when you create a PGP key, there would be two keys that get generated, guys. There would be two keys that get generated, public as well as private keys. Public key is used to encrypt a file, private key is used to decrypt the files. Now let's, there are thousands of tools out in the market, guys, which can help you to generate public and private keys. There are thousands of tools out there which can help you generate public and private keys. But what you need to understand is you can also generate the public and private keys in a Fusion Cloud application as well. So I'm trying to log into Fusion Cloud application, ESCV instance as a finance implementation user, and I would go into tools, security console, and from here, I can go into certificates. So this is a place from where we can generate a PGP certificate. You can import a PGP key if a third party is giving you, and you can also generate one. So you generate it and you say PGP key. We need to give it a name, guys. We need to give it a name. So I'm going to call this as UG63 PGP key. I'm going to call this as UG63 PGP key. I would enter it here. So UG63 PGP key. This is a name that I'm giving, alias name, UG63 PGP key. And I'm entering the same string as a passphrase as well. Remember, this passphrase would be required. We need to share this password with a private key to the third party, so that even if somebody gets hold of a private key, it is still secure. They would also need the password. And you also see three options here, guys, and these three options are going to control how complex the encryption key is going to be. So the key that's going to get generated, right? So the complexity of that key would be dependent on the options that you select here. So let's say if I select RSA here, select just the latest options available in the dropdowns, guys. We don't need to do a PhD in what these options mean, individual options mean. If you just select the latest options, it basically means that key that gets generated would be quite complex one. Do remember the encryption algorithm, RSA key, click on save and close. And when you click on save and close, what would happen, guys? The key gets generated. You can pick up the key and search for it. And we do have an option to export public and private keys. Remember, when you create a PGP key, two keys get generated, guys, public and private. So when you export a public key, you see public key gets exported. Remember, it didn't ask us to enter a password. What can you do with a public key, guys? Maximum? Encrypt a file, right? So since you can only encrypt a file with a public key, it is really, it is least bothered. And you also have an option to export a private key as well. And when you export a private key, what can you do with a private key, guys? You can
decrypt the
file. So when you export a private key, it would prompt you to enter a passphrase, because Fusion Cloud wants to make sure that you are not somebody who sneaked into this particular section by mistake or deliberately. Okay, they wants to make sure that you are the authorized user. So they're going to, unless you enter a passphrase, you will not be able to export it. And I've entered the same key name itself as a passphrase. So I'm going to say save as. So you see two keys exported, guys, public and private keys. Now I just want to show you how you can make use of this public key to encrypt a file and private key to decrypt it. Now to do this hands-on or to see the encryption in action, what is it that we need, guys? We need a PGP tool, right? So just go to Google and type in PGP tool, guys. So go to the first link. So PGP tool, this is a link that you need to use. This is a link that you need to use. This is basically a free tool, guys. Pretty easy to use. It's available for all the operating systems. You can just download it and install the tool. Once you download and install this tool, you would see a locker symbol like this appearing on your desktop. You would see a locker symbol like this appearing on your desktop. You just have to double click on that locker symbol. And that would help you to encrypt and decrypt the files. So you can go ahead and download this. If you are using Windows machine and executable file gets downloaded, double click on it and you see a locker symbol. That you see application opening up, and you would see an option to encrypt and decrypt the files. So if you are using Linux and Mac OS, there would be a jar file that gets downloaded, and we need to launch the jar file to open the tool. And let me go ahead and do that. I'm going to launch that jar file, PGP tool jar file. So this is how you need to do it. So I'm just using a Java from a bin folder to launch the PGP tool. Now let it open up. Now once the tool opens up, you would be able to see an option to encrypt and decrypt the file. And before you encrypt and decrypt a file, remember we also have an option to import a PGP key. We also have an option to import a PGP key. Do we also see an option to create a PGP key, guys, here? So remember what I said earlier, there are thousands of tools from where you can create PGP keys. You can do it from a third-party tools like PGP tool, and you can also at the same time use a Fusion Cloud application also to generate PGP keys. So since I already have a PGP key generated, I'm going to import that PGP key here into the tool. And I'm going to say key pair imported. And after you load the key pair, I can go ahead and encrypt a file. Okay, so I go to FilleTransfer service, and I would go ahead and encrypt the file. So I'm going to pick up items1.csv as an example, and I need to select which key do I want to use to encrypt it. I want to use UG63 PGP key to encrypt it. I want to use UG63 PGP key to encrypt it. And where do I want the file to be placed? I want the file to be placed to the same location. But I would say, yes, the file should not be named as items1.pgp, guys. We also retain the file extension when we encrypt the file. So it would be file extension plus .pgp. Okay, and we can also delete a source file if we want. Go ahead and click on encrypted. So the file is encrypted, and let me show you how the file content is going to look like, guys. If it is a plain CSV file, guys, You open it with a text editor, you get to see the content, right? Yes or no, guys? But let's see what would happen if I open this encrypted file. Would I be able to see the content, guys? Any guess?
No.
No.
Yeah. So if I pick up this text editor, so this is how it's going to look like. So which means when I place the files, when I write the files to target FTP server, I'm not going to write a plain CSV files there. I'm going to encrypt them. And I would write the encrypted files in a target FTP server so that even if somebody is able to crack into that SFTP server, I don't really care because my content is secure. And the only person who can see the content of this encrypted file would be the third party because I'm going to share the private key with him.
Private key.
Yeah. So what the third party system is going to do, they're going to use this, they're going to decrypt this file. They're going to decrypt the file with a private key. So they're going to use the private key to decrypt it. And when you try to decrypt the file, you would still be prompted to enter a passphrase. Click OK. And I would say use same folder so that the file gets saved to the same location, and I'm going to decrypt it. Now you go back in here, you should be able to see the file placed in here. So third-party system is going to see the file content. Because third-party system, they cannot pick up this file from SFTP server and process it. For them to process this file, they should be able to decrypt it. And to decrypt it, we're going to share a private key with a third party. Now, one important point is the FTP connections that we use, right? The FTP connections that we have created do support PGP encryption, right? So there's one line that we have seen, guys. What does that line says? Line says FTP adapter supports a PGP encryption. What it means, guys? What it means is if you go to the FTP connection, in the FTP connection, we do have a provision. We do have a provision under security. If you expand optional, we do have an option to upload a PGP public and private keys. So depending on the integration requirements, you can go to appropriate connections and you can upload a public key in case you want to use the connection to encrypt a file, or in case you want to use a connection to decrypt a file because you're trying to download some file which is encrypted and you need to decrypt it, and you can upload the private key here. So within the connection, FTP connection, we do have a provision to upload public and private PGP key sets. Okay. Now tell me one thing, guys. Think about it carefully and answer me, guys. In this whole integration, we created two connections, right? Source connection, target connection. So when WMS system writes the files to server, source SFTP server, it is a plain CSV files that they are going to place. It is not an encrypted file, guys. So when I'm going to read the file, I'm dealing with a plain CSV files. That's fine because it is an on-prem server. We don't need to encrypt it. But when we write the file to target, we need to encrypt it. So in source connection, do we need to upload any key, guys? Source FTP connection.
Yes, public key.
Now in the source FTP connection. Now we are going to use target FTP connection to write the file, right? So in the target FTP connection, what you said is absolutely right. We need to upload the public key. Why public key? Because we need to encrypt the file, right? So in the source FTP connection, we don't need anything, but in the target FTP connection, since we are going to use this connection to write the file to target FTP server, and since we want to write an encrypted file there, I would expand the properties and I would upload the public key there. I would upload the public key. And ASCII armor encryption format as yes, AES 256 is the algorithm that we picked up. So this is a key that we need, and I'm going to just save it and test the connection. Okay, so depending on the requirement within the connections, we can upload the public and private keys, PGP public and private keys, depending on what exactly you want to do. Encryption or decryption, upload the keys accordingly. Now this encryption and decryption comes into integrations quite often, guys. So for example, if it's an inbound scenario, okay, let's say a third-party system or a source system is giving you a file and you need to load it into cloud. And let's say that file contains sensitive information, maybe a HCM file with employees information, or let's say it is a core banking system giving you a journals file with the important information. So what source system or third party going to do? They are going to encrypt the file with a public key, and they would share a private key with us. And what we do in our integration, guys, in our integration, we are going to download this encrypted file, and we need to load it into ERP cloud, guys. So after I download it, can I send encrypted file directly to ERP, guys? No, right? It doesn't work. So I would go to the FTP connection and I would upload the private key that third party has shared with me in FTP connection. And when I use the FTP connection in the integration to download this file from the third party, I would just tick one box which says decrypt the file. Remember, within the connection, we upload the keys, public and private keys. And when we use the connection in the integration flow, I'm going to show you tomorrow, guys. When we use the connection in the integration flow to do the download operation, we would see one option which says, Prasad, do you want to decrypt the file? I say, yes, I will just tick that box. And OIC go to that connection. And from the connection, they are going to pick up it's going to pick up the public or private key as appropriate. How about the other scenario, guys? Outbound. Sometimes we might place the files in SFTP for downstream systems, right? So in this case, we are writing the file. So you could think of the same scenario as well, similar scenario here, because here also we're writing the files to the target, right? So since we are writing the files, we are going to encrypt the file with the third file that we are sending with a public key, right? And after we encrypt the file with a public key, what is it that we're going to do? We would share a private key with a third party. So that's exactly what we have done, right? So we've used public key to encrypt the file, and we're going to share a private key with a third party. And how are we going to write the encrypted file? So this encrypt the file with public key. We will see how to do it in the integration tomorrow. But for me, when I use this connection in the integration tomorrow to do the write file operation, in the integration, I would just tick one box which say encrypt the file. But what OIC is going to do, it's going to come into the connection. And within the connection, you have FTP keys here. Sorry, the PGP keys. It's going to pick up this public PGP key to encrypt the file. And we would share the private key with the third party, and private key uses it to decrypt it. Remember, this PGP keys are available in two different formats, guys, unsigned version and signed version. So you see PGP, public key, private key, and other options. And you also see public and private keys here. So these are assigned PGP keys, and these are unsigned PGP key options. So the PGP key that's generated in Fusion Cloud and by most applications available today in the market, they are unsigned keys, guys. So you will be uploading them here. If it's a signed PGP key that you get from a client, you can upload them here. Okay. So we need to go ahead and get started with the integration. I think we reached a logical stage, guys. We'll do this tomorrow. Yes, Vishal.
So, Prasad, basic question, like we don't want to expose our SFTP site. So same way this applies to our client also, correct? How come they will be ready to expose their SFTP? Basic question, but I don't know.
This is not a client. So what you need to understand is it's basically a third party system or a vendor, and vendor is not going to expose their internal system. They just use a third party or a cloud SFTP server. So this is like a third party system or just a file server. It's not the third party's internal SFTP server. It's not that. So it's just a SFTP server sitting in cloud, a third party application, which this system has got access to. Okay.
Understood. Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions, guys?
And second one, you said it requires passkey also, correct? So do we have a placeholder to upload that also?
Yeah, in the
along with encryption.
In the FTP connection, if you upload a private key, it would prompt you to enter a passphrase as well. See, for example, if I go into this connection here, so private key when it would be required, private key would be required when we have to decrypt the file. Say, for example, in this particular use case, let's say WMS system is going to write a encrypted file to server 1. And when we read the file or when we download the file here using FTP server 1, we want to decrypt that file. Only then I can see the file content. So how do you decrypt the file in server 1? Source SFTP server. So I go into source SFTP connection. So since WMS system is going to encrypt the file and place it in server 1, I would receive a decryption key from them. And let's say they shared this decryption key. I would upload the decryption key here, the private key. And when I upload the private key here, I'm going to share the private key password as well. So if I don't upload a private key password, it's not going to work, guys.
Okay.
Okay, so it says private key password. Okay, yeah. Any other questions, guys?
A small query. Prasad, am I
Yeah.
audible?
Yes,
Yes.
please go on.
Okay. So as you have already told that FTP connection would be only in invoke condition, right? It cannot be a trigger. So if in case we want some integration use case such that whenever an event occur and it should get, I mean, whenever a file is written at SFTP server 1 and it should get written to SFTP 2. So for that case, we will use FPDI upload if I'm wrong here. Correct me, right? I'm waiting what
FPDI has got nothing to do with the ability to transfer or ability to start an integration based on a trigger. Okay,
Okay.
so the FPDI is a different story altogether. Forget about it. Okay, so it's only going to confuse it. Okay, if your question is, if your question is, Prasad, I'm not going to build an integration and I'm not going to schedule this service to run every 1 hour. Okay, so that is not my requirement. And my requirement is that when a file is placed in the input location, okay, so this is output, right? So when a file is placed in input location, my integration should be kicked off. Okay, so that is your requirement. Okay, so your simple answer to the client is, sorry, boss, that is not possible in OIC. Okay, so if something is not possible, something is not possible, as simple as that. So this FTP adapter that you have, in OIC doesn't have the polling capability. We also have another adapter called FilleTransfer or a file adapter. And this adapter has an ability to poll on a folder. But this file adapter can only help you to use a local file systems. So for example, if I use a file here, I can only pick up a files from my MacBook. So yes, we do have a polling capability with a file adapter, but nobody uses that because we cannot use a file systems, internal file systems. Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah. Any other questions, guys?
If such use cases come,
we would usually ask them to give us an appropriate frequency, and we schedule it accordingly every 1 hour or every 2 hours. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, guys? Yeah. Thanks, everyone. See you tomorrow.
Thank you.